What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Tuesday, August 20th edition of the Ship My Money Show. I'm your host, Adam Scherer. You can follow me on Twitter at ShipMyMoney DFS. And we have a 13-game MLB slate tonight. Pretty weird slate where nothing really looks great. Obviously, there's some stuff that looks better than others, but looks like it should be a pretty wide open tournament slate. I went through and wrote notes on every single game earlier for end game subscribers and my Dub Club subscribers. And for most of those games and most of the players, it was kind of just like, yeah, whatever. It looks fine. I don't hate it. I don't like it. I think slates like this are really, really difficult to do content on. They're tough to talk about. Nobody wants to hear you just kind of say, like, yeah, I don't really know. Everything looks the same. But I do think that they're really fun to play. They're my favorite slates to play. So I'm excited to talk about it. I am glad that I'm doing a show like this as opposed to a game by game, tell you who to play show, because that would be difficult. Because again, I think it all kind of looks the same. But I am interested to kind of dive into how the lineups look that I would be playing if the slate started right now in large field DraftKings tournaments, what my exposures look like relative to the field, how they look generally as far as, being flat or concentrated or whatever it may be. So looking forward to getting through all of that. David said favorite home run play today. I don't know. I haven't run anything. I don't have anything off the top of my head. There's a lot of good pitchers parks, which sucks. I like Ryan Mountcastle. I mentioned him in the article that I wrote for subscribers. He would have like 5 more home runs if he played all of his games in New York compared to if he played all of his games in Baltimore. Has the matchup against Quintana, which isn't bad. Corey Seager looks really, really good. But yeah, kind of going along with what I was just saying, as from a DFS standpoint, there's not a lot of great pitching today. There's not a lot of terrible pitching. There's not a lot of great hitters parks. There's a few, but really just weird slate where I think ownership should be pretty spread out for the most part. And I think that it should be pretty fun to play because you can kind of just get to whatever you want. You shouldn't have to worry about ownership all that much since it is likely to be spread out. So as I have been on these shows, going to go position by position and then position by position and stack by stack, looking at what I'm getting to. Make sure you hit the thumbs up button for the show, subscribe to the channel, get notifications so you get alerts when these shows go live. We'll be starting to mix in some different scheduling soon with NFL coming up as well. So make sure you do that. Also, if you haven't already subscribed to Endgame Syndicate, you can do so using the link in the description below. Great time to do that. We will have one more monthly roundtable coming up before the start of NFL season. That is a member-only, subscriber-only Q&A with Utica, Nerdy Tenor, Brick75, and myself talking DFS, answering whatever you have to ask. So good time to get in for that. I know Yuta is going to start putting out some of his NFL videos soon. Obviously, in general, we'll have NFL videos coming out soon talking strategy, giving you advice and input on how you can get better at DFS going into NFL season. So great time to check that out. You can do so using the link in the description below. Now, starting with the pitching, pretty much getting to the popular pitchers for the most part. Cole Reagans, Robbie Ray, Zach Wheeler. It's difficult for me to really get around them. Now, you can see that I'm not jamming any of them specifically. I don't have 80% of any of these guys, but the field's projected to get to about 36% of Reagans. I'm at 39%. It's a relatively difficult matchup as far as the Angels are or have been much better against left-handed pitching this year. They have a 110 WRC plus on their active roster in that split. They rank in the middle of the pack in strikeout percentage, but it is worth noting that Cole Reagans has a really, really, really good changeup, and that is a pitch that generally is going to lead to reverse splits, and that's been the case with Reagans. Not that he's bad against lefties. He doesn't really give up much production to either side of the plate, but his strikeout percentage against right-handed hitters this year is about 10 points higher than against lefties. 30.9% K percentage against righties, only 20.7% against lefties. So while the Angels are a team that has done a lot of damage against left-handed pitching this year, they're running 8 right-handed hitters out there against Reagans, and he is somebody that just dominates right-handed bats. So he does look good here. Again, this is a park that is not good for getting strikeouts, but Reagans pitches all of his home games here, so it is baked into his salary. If he pitched in a more favorable park for pitching, he would just have a higher strikeout percentage and be more expensive than he is. 9,500 is a very fair price tag here. Robbie Ray showing up 37% for me. Fields at about 27%. So I'm a little bit overweight, but nothing too crazy. Good matchup against the White Sox. It's a middle of the road strikeout matchup, but just an awful offense. 84 WRC plus on their active roster against left-handed pitching this year. Really doesn't get worse than that. And then this game is being played in San Francisco as well. Now you do, with Robbie Ray, get the normal issues of he wastes too many pitches, he walks too many guys, and it does create situations where he can get in trouble because he walks a couple guys, gets unlucky on balls in play, and then suddenly he's giving up 3-4 runs. But at 8,600, certainly willing to take on those risks. He did miss most of this season with an injury. He has had some rust since coming back. He's allowed like 2.5 home runs per 9 innings. He's walked 13% of the hitters that he's faced, but he does also have a 32.5% strikeout percentage. So at 8,600, happy to get to him here. But again, it's not like I'm just jamming him in every lineup. He doesn't look that good. He just looks very good compared to the alternatives on this slate. And then Zach Wheeler showing up a lot for me as well. Pretty much in line with the field, 24% ownership, 23% of the lineups that I would be playing right now. Facing this watered-down Atlanta lineup, they've been banged up pretty much all season long. Now they're missing Austin Riley again. He had missed some time earlier this year on the paternity list. Now he's out for, I think, 6 to 8 weeks with whatever injury he sustained. I don't remember what it was. I just know that it happened. So it sets up as a pretty nice spot for Wheeler. He's only 9,300. Obviously a very good pitcher. One of the more talented pitchers on the slate. 27.5% K percentage, 3.5 xFIP. All that looks pretty good. So not taking any massive stands on these popular pitchers, but I do think the field's pretty much got it right. They look like the best options to me. They look like the best options to the field. And then you get kind of a second tier of guys here that I'm getting like 8 to 18% ownership on. And none of them come with a ton of confidence, but they are all good enough and or in good enough matchups that they do have a path to success. They do have some upside. Nick Pivetta, only projected for around 8% ownership here. He has a very, very difficult matchup against Houston. Very dangerous matchup. The Astros, we know, have a lot of power. They're also a very difficult team to strike out. They have the 4th lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this year. That is generally a mix that I don't like for Pivetta because he gets a ton of strikeouts, but he's not very good at inducing weak contact. So when you do put the ball in play against him, generally it's hit hard and he gives up a lot of power. So when you get a team like the Astros that is good at putting the ball in and with authority, that's a really scary spot for Pivetta. But there's 2 things that I do like here, 3 things I like here. One is that overall pitching on this slate leaves a lot to be desired. It's not like you have an abundance of really good pitchers in really good strikeout matchups that you're giving up to get to Pivetta. So the opportunity cost isn't as high as it would be on some other slates. He's not popular. When you get to volatile players in general, and this is not even baseball specific, this is kind of any sport. When you're talking about volatile players, the higher owned someone is, the less likely I want to play them. The lower owned they are, the more I want to play them. We talk about players that have less volatility. Obviously, a lot of times their ceiling isn't going to be as high. Their range of outcomes isn't as wide, but you can kind of count on them to be more consistent. Pivetta is in that former group where I kind of just want to be doing the opposite of the field a lot of the time with him. And here, the field isn't really getting to him. And then also, you're just getting a price discount at 7,800. This is a pitcher that has a 30% strikeout percentage in his starts this year, 3.39 xFIP. There's no question about the strikeout ability or the underlying talent for Pivetta. So getting him at 7,800 kind of alleviates, it doesn't alleviate the risk, but it does give him a little bit more margin for error. And it at least kind of alleviates, you look at him and you say, yeah, but he's facing Houston, but he's also priced to be facing Houston. And SMP with a good point as well. No Bregman, no Tucker. So it's not the best Houston lineup either. Obviously, it's still a good lineup. You have Altuve, you have Alvarez, you have Diaz, you have Pena. But the bottom of this order, they're not bad, but it's not as deep a lineup as it would be if those guys were in. So that's a good point as well. Like I said, their active roster still, has the 4th lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching, but the WRC plus against right-handed pitching is 111. If you had a full strength Houston team, it's closer to, I think, like 115, 120. So that all makes me pretty interested to get to Pivetta in top-heavy tournaments. Shane Baz, Field's getting to about 10%. I'm getting to about 17. $7,600 price tag is reasonable. Pitching in Oakland is perfectly fine. The A's have power, which is scary, but they do strike out a lot. Obviously they did some damage against Taj Bradley yesterday. They've blown up plenty of popular pitchers this year. They've been if you've stacked them every day, you've probably made a lot of money this season. But the upside is still there for pitchers going against them because of the strikeouts that they have. Boz has a pretty good arm talent, only about a 20.5% K percentage through 7 starts this year, but projects are closer to around a 22 to 23% K percentage going forward. And he's not priced like a great strikeout pitcher or anything like that. So I don't really have any issues getting him at 7,600. Ronel Blanco on the other side of Pivetta in that Houston game, 10% projected ownership. I'm getting to about 11. He is a good strikeout pitcher. He's not as good as Pivetta, but he does come in with a 24% strikeout percentage. He has a 4.1 xFIP. He has a little bit better strikeout matchup going up against Boston, but the way the Red Sox match up against him is really scary. They have 5 left-handed bats in their top 6, and they're all good. Duran, Abreu, Casas, Devers, Yoshida, and then Tyler O'Neill in there batting 5th as a right-handed bat. Blanco has had major issues with left-handed hitters this year. The strikeouts are okay at 22.5%, still lower than against righties where he's at 26%, but he's allowed a 235 expected ISO, a 344 expected WOBA to them, compared to a 108 expected ISO to righties, 272 expected WOBA to righties. So while these guys will strike out a bit, it's a really, really tough matchup for Blanco when you look at what he struggles with and how the Red Sox set up against him. So kind of like with Pivetta, it's a tough matchup for him too, in that he's facing a bunch of guys to put the ball in play, and that's not ideal for him. But you do have a higher strikeout baseline for Pivetta than you do for Blanco. So I'm perfectly fine with where the field is on Blanco. There is clearly some upside there, but it is a very, very dangerous spot for him as well against the Red Sox, especially with the way this Red Sox lineup is rolling out. Cody Bradford getting 14% ownership. I'm a little below the field, but pretty close. 9% exposure for me. Good matchup against Pittsburgh. They strike out, but it is a park upgrade for the Pirates. Bradford does give up some power to right-handed hitters, and he is just a little expensive. Like at 8,100, I think he's kind of just priced to face the Pirates. Whereas I was saying, Pivetta's salary is lower than usual because of Houston. It's kind of the opposite for Bradford here. So I don't necessarily think that there's a ton of value, but he does just look like a perfectly serviceable SP2. I don't mind being around the field. He has a 23% K percentage this year. He's also walked less than 4% of hitters, which is nice. 4.14 xFIP, a little over 1 home run per 9 innings. Park upgrade for the Pirates, as I mentioned. Don't think we have that lineup yet. They don't have a ton of right-handed power, but Reynolds, Joe, Bart, De La Cruz, those guys can do some damage from the right side. Reynolds in particular obviously is good. But overall, I think just kind of priced where he should be. Ownership is about where it should be. Perfectly fine SP2. Luis Heel, I'm getting 9%. Fields at 10. Very, very good strikeout pitcher. Absolutely brutal strikeout matchup. So kind of similar to Pivetta, except I think Pivetta is the better overall pitcher. xFIP is like 0.8 of a run better than Heel. Pavetta's only walked 6% of hitters this year, whereas Heel has walked about 12. So I still would rather go, and Pavetta's $1,200 less also. So I'd rather go to Pivetta for those reasons. But Heel does have a 27.5% strikeout percentage, 28% strikeout percentage. He obviously is capable of getting those strikeouts. It's just that the Guardians have the 3rd lowest K percentage against right-handed pitching this season. So, pretty unlikely that you get that huge Heel strikeout game, but obviously could happen. I don't mind getting some of him. Joey Estes, very, very cheap. Good strikeout matchup against Tampa. 3rd highest K percentage against right-handed pitching on their active roster. Good park to pitch in. Very, very cheap price tag. Modest ownership at 6%. The only problem with Estes is that he sucks at pitching. Other than that, I would really, really like him. About a 5 xFIP, striking out around 18% of hitters this year. He's not very good, but he's cheap. He's not popular. He's facing a team that Ks a lot. Get to him here and there, I think is fine, but certainly not prioritizing him. Same can be said for Jose Barrios. He's taken a pretty substantial step back this year, only striking out about 18.5% of hitters. The Reds have a top 10 K percentage against righties. They are in Rogers Center instead of Great American, which is a park downgrade. Barrios is fairly priced at 8K, probably a little bit overpriced for his current talent level. Mix him in, but not somebody I'd be wanting to prioritize. So pretty flat on pitching, and I think it makes sense. Like the way my pitching exposure sets up is pretty much exactly how I would want it to, where I'm getting to what I think are pretty clearly the best 3 pitchers on the slate, and the field agrees. But I don't think that they are guys that I really just want to be shoving into lineups because they do all still have their own flaws. In Reagan's case, it's the park and the matchup. In Ray's case, it's his inability to throw strikes. Wheeler, I think, is similar to Reagan's in that he's a really good pitcher, and if I had more, I wouldn't be too worried about it. But still, at 9,300, there are plenty of other guys that have a similar range of outcomes, even if they project a little bit lower. So I think that being pretty spread out like this at pitching does make sense to me. It just speaks to how really wide open this slate is. But I do think Reagan's, Ray, Wheeler are the priorities, and then here just kind of getting overweight on some of these more volatile pitchers like Pivetta and Baz. Getting to a little bit of Walker Buehler, obviously good strikeout matchup against Seattle, but he's really struggled this year as well. Bailey Ober was mentioned in chat. Jake said he likes Bailey Ober here. I'm not getting to him, but that game is just kind of weird to me. It's a really, really tough spot for Ober. He does have good strikeout stuff. So if you wanted to just say, Ober's not going to get much ownership, I want some Ober instead of for me, I have 20 or 18%, whatever, of Pivetta. If you wanted to just turn some of that into Bailey Ober, it's not that different. Ober has a 26.5% K percentage. The Padres have the lowest strikeout percentage against right-handed pitching this season. But obviously the upside is there for Ober. It's just that the matchup is absolutely brutal. But you could certainly throw him into that Luis Heel, Nick Pivetta range. I personally just am not getting him right now. From a stacking standpoint, pretty flat here as well. Looking at all stacks, Tampa Bay at the top. I mentioned Joey Estes, one of the least talented pitchers on the slate. Tampa Bay is also pretty fairly priced. The park isn't good. Their offense isn't great, but they are pretty fairly priced. They do have some left-handed power, which is something that Estes has struggled with a lot. I will be interested to see which Rays bats I'm getting to in particular, because there are a couple that I would like to be getting to the most. Seattle, nice park upgrade against a struggling Walker Buehler. The downside, of course, is that it's Seattle, and they've let us down 100 times already this year. This is the best Seattle, the best version of Seattle, though, that we've gotten all season long. Julio Rodriguez is back from injury. Randy Arozarena is on the team now. So it is as good as it's been for the Mariners in this park. They are just naturally a little bit underpriced because their pricing factors in their stats for the season, which, over half their games are played in pitchers' parks. So they are just going to be a little bit underpriced in Dodger Stadium. Happy to be getting to them. The White Sox, a team that ideally I think I'd be getting as mini stacks, but maybe I'm getting some 5-mans. I haven't looked. Negatively correlate with a volatile pitcher in Ray. So while I am happy to get to Ray because I think he's cheap at 8,600 and he certainly has strikeout upside, he is a volatile pitcher that is capable of getting blown up. And if you get a good game from the White Sox, not only are you negatively correlating with a 30 or so % owned pitcher in Ray, you also have a pretty cheap White Sox team. So the guys that you can piece around them are going to look really good. Toronto going up against Carson Spears, no issues with that in Rogers Center. Just not a particularly good pitcher. He has given up some power to both sides of the plate this year, and the Blue Jays are pretty favorably priced outside of Guerrero, and obviously paying for Guerrero is perfectly fine. Spears 182 expected ISO to righties. Rogers Center does play up right-handed power more than left-handed power. He actually has been pretty unlucky against lefties so far this year. 149 expected ISO compared to a 232 actual ISO. That's not to say that you should be shying away from Dalton Varsho or Will Wagner batting cleanup at 2,500 or Spencer Horwitz or Lo Profito. These guys are all fine from the left side and cheap, but Springer, Guerrero, Kirk, all are going to look pretty good as well, especially Springer and Guerrero. So perfectly fine getting to Toronto. But as you can see here, just really, really spread out. And again, I kind of just think that's exactly how I would want to be approaching this slate across a set of 20, 50, 150. In this case, it's 150. But however many lineups, just because everything looks so similar. On slates like this, I'm unlikely to be grabbing one or two teams and just jamming them in because the range of outcomes for everything looks so similar. I do typically end up flatter. And that's what we're seeing here. If we look at my 5-mans, Tampa Bay at the top in 10% of the lineups, pretty flat overall. One negative for Tampa Bay. It is, a good matchup hitting wise against Estes. In the 87 innings pitched this year, he has allowed 0 stolen bases. So, we don't have much of a sample size on him to know if he's somebody that teams can run on or not, but they haven't so far this year. And when you're going to a team like Tampa Bay, obviously I would like to have stolen base upside there. It doesn't seem like we have it based on how teams have treated Estes so far, but you do certainly have plenty of just offensive upside going up against a pretty bad pitcher. Seattle, I mentioned as a full stack. Cincinnati, getting to them against Barrios, perfectly fine with me. He, like I said, has dropped off quite a bit this year. He's not striking guys out at a high rate. He's allowed a 198 expected ISO to lefties, 184 to righties. The park is fine for offense, even though it's not as good as Great American. So getting to the Reds makes sense. The Angels, again, just negatively correlate with Cole Reagans. If I had to choose one side, I would much rather be getting the Cole Reagans than the Angels against him. But it is a good park for offense. It is a park that limits strikeouts. It is an Angels team that has a lot of hitters that do damage against left-handed pitching. Although, like I said, Reagans is better against righties than lefties. It's just a negative correlation play. Same goes for the White Sox. Phillies in kind of an interesting spot going up against Reynaldo Lopez. He's been very good this year, but he is coming back from the injured list. He missed about 3 weeks. He threw 71 pitches over 4 innings in his rehab start. So I don't expect him to be significantly limited tonight, but I also don't expect him to be unlimited. And also you just get a little bit of increased volatility when you're getting somebody back from the injured list. You don't know how much of a factor rust is going to play. And the Phillies obviously have a ton of talent in their lineup. The difficult part with Philadelphia from a stacking standpoint is that they are expensive. At least the guys that you would want to get to don't have their lineup yet, but Schwarber, Turner, Harper, all above 5K on DraftKings. Alec Baum, 4,900. Bryson Stott, 4K. Castellanos, 4,200. Real Muto, 4,400. So not the easiest team to get to. Maybe a team where if you're stacking the best players, that's the kind of team where like you roll the dice on somebody like Joey Estes at 6,300. Or if you're paying for better pitching, you use the bottom of the order, mix in somebody from down there that's a little bit cheaper. But they do have one of the higher implied run totals on the slate. The upside is obviously there for them. Power said the Philly lineup just came out. Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Bohm, Castellanos, Stott, Realmuto, Marsh, Rojas. So yeah, pretty much the expected lineup. It's relatively expensive, but you can make it work. There's different ways that you can make it work. Texas in Texas, Pittsburgh in Texas, no problems with either of those. Again, you are getting some ownership going into Bradford. Getting to right-handed bats against him in this park is going to be pretty appealing, given that it's a park upgrade for the Pirates. The problem is they just don't have a lot of good right-handed power, and you do have pinch hit risk with somebody like Connor Joe as well. But 206 expected ISO allowed to righties by Bradford so far this season, and that park upgrade going into Texas. On the other side, Texas going up against Mitch Keller. He has allowed a lot of power to left-handed hitters this year. Pretty weird splits for Keller. 25% strikeout percentage against lefties compared to only 16% against righties, but a 207 expected ISO and a 233 actual ISO to lefties compared to a 107 expected ISO, 108 actual ISO to righties. So I'm not going to go so far as to say it's a good matchup for the Rangers, but when you're just talking about power upside, somebody like Corey Seager looks really good here. Josh Smith is batting third. Nathaniel Lowe is batting fifth. These guys do have legitimate home run upside against Keller. He has struggled with power, limiting power in that split. The park is good. So getting to some Rangers, Seager in particular, looks pretty good. Now we'll take a look going position by position. Obviously, in a lot of cases, it's just going to be pretty in line with the stacks that I'm getting to, but we'll see what stands out here. Cal Raleigh showing up as my most used catcher at 10%. Danny Jansen, this one is weird. May come down a little bit, may not. I had an issue with my ownership when I ran all this, so I underrepresented Jansen, I think, in the fields that I simulated against. So maybe I would have a little bit less Danny Jansen, but it's not like he, jumped into 30% of my lineups or anything. 9% is completely reasonable. Obviously, he's not actually going to be 0% owned, probably closer to like 4 or 5. You do prefer left-handed bats against Blanco, but Jansen's only 3,400. He does get the short porch in left field in the Crawford boxes in Houston and does correlate with those left-handed bats that I'd like to get to. Wasn't getting to a lot of Boston stacks. I kind of would like that to change also, but it's not something I'm going to force in, but they do, I think the lefties, like I said, match up pretty well with Blanco. Jansen gives you some power upside at catcher. Tyler Stevenson going up against Barrios, decent power for a catcher in a park that plays up right-handed power against a pitcher that doesn't do a great job of limiting it. William Contreras going up against Eric Fetty. You do prefer lefties against Fetty. This game in particular is just kind of a really weird one. Somebody earlier, I think, had actually asked about Montas versus the Cards. I don't see it right now, but it was probably when I did my game by game article earlier, it was probably the game that I had the least to say because I just didn't know really what to say about it. Like the game is in St. Louis, which isn't a particularly good hitter's park. Eric Fetty's not bad. Frankie Montas isn't good, but he's not horrible. Both guys give up more power to lefties. If you want to just kind of get to hitters here and there, it's fine. But in the context of the slate, I don't think any of it really stands out either. William Contreras, obviously somebody you can play. He's one of the better hitting catchers in baseball. He's 4,900, but it's not like you're looking at the matchup with Fetty and saying, oh, this is a great spot, or you're looking at this park and really excited to get the bats there. So at 3-4% ownership, always willing to play Contreras, but it's not like there's anything special about him. So pretty spread out at catcher. I would assume a lot of this just kind of lines up with what is in my stacks, and that's pretty much how it should be. Cal Raleigh, I think, is the easiest guy to get excited about here, just because he does have so much power. He's priced to play his games in pitcher-friendly parks. As we've talked about, Bueller's K percentage is down this year. 192 expected ISO allowed to lefties. Raleigh, I like quite a bit. John Carlson said Joey Bart. Yeah, he looks fine. He's only showing up in like 3% of the lineups I built. Fields at 3%. But Bradford does give up some right-handed power. Bart gets a park upgrade. Perfectly fine. Would obviously prefer him in either Pittsburgh mini stacks or full stacks. But yeah, looks fine. There's not a lot that stands out at catcher here. Adley Rutschman, obviously, if you can find the salary against Quintana, looks fine. Alvarez against Dean Kramer, who has given up power to both sides of the plate this year. And from a right-handed hitting standpoint, this is a park downgrade for Kramer. It is harder to hit home runs in Citi Field for lefties than it is in Baltimore, but it is easier for righties. On top of that, you do have a weak Baltimore bullpen behind Kramer if the Mets can get to him early. So somebody like Alvarez that's not getting much ownership and is cheap, perfectly fine play, but probably going to be pretty spread out at catcher, and that's not a problem. Switching over to first base, Brandon Lau, 12% of my lineups at first base. I assume I'm going to have him even more at second base, and he is one of the Tampa guys that I was hoping I'd be getting to. Joey Estes has gotten absolutely lit up by left-handed hitters this year. Brandon Lau has plenty of power. He's clearly one of the best hitters that Tampa Bay has. 254 expected ISO to left-handed hitters with only a 13.8% K percentage for Joey Estes so far this season. 241 plate appearances against righties for Brandon Lau with a 250 actual ISO, 274 expected ISO, 376 expected WOBA. He looks really, really good, whether it's at first base or second base. 9% ownership is relatively high in the context of the slate, but it's not a high enough raw number that I really care all that much as far as the lineups that I'm playing in tournaments. So I do really like getting to him. Yandy Diaz at 4K. I'm around 2 to 3x the field on him. Estes does have a higher strikeout percentage against righties at 21.5%, 180 expected ISO. So he doesn't get hit as hard by righties. He is just generally better against righties as you would expect, but still don't mind getting to some Diaz. There is still some power upside there. Ty France, very cheap, batting 6th against Barrios. Just hope he runs into one. Not the best hitter, but does have some power, and he's cheap. Bryce Harper, Freddie Freeman, Ryan Mountcastle, all pretty self-explanatory. Mountcastle I did touch on a little bit at the top of the show, but he is particularly interesting to me here just because he gets the righty-lefty matchup against Quintana, and he does get that sneaky park upgrade in Citi Field, a park that you don't necessarily think of as being a great park for hitting home runs. Over the last 3 seasons, though, for right-handed home runs, Citi Field has a 101 park factor, which is about average, but Camden Yards is 78, which is obviously well below average. So it's a substantial park upgrade for Ryan Mountcastle in particular. And like I said, if he played all of his games in Camden Yards this year, he would have 11 home runs. If he played them all in Citi Field, he would have 16. So I do think he's a pretty interesting play here at only 4K and not a lot of ownership. One thing to touch on as an aside, since we are talking about Mountcastle, and I did mention Rutschman earlier too, it is a pretty decent spot for Baltimore. Again, you are getting that park upgrade for the righties. Quintana is a completely average pitcher. The one thing to keep in mind, though, is that there is a lot of pinch hit risk in this lineup. Also, didn't have the Baltimore lineup when I ran this, but Adley is not in it, so don't play him. Mountcastle's hitting second, so that actually makes him look a little bit better. But what I was going to say is that Austin Slater is leading off. Eloy Jimenez is hitting 5th and DHing. Those guys both carry substantial pinch hit risk. There's no Ryan O'Hearn in the lineup. He's pretty likely to hit for Jimenez later in the game once a right-handed reliever is in. There's no Cedric Mullins in the lineup. He's pretty likely to hit for Slater later in the game once a right-handed reliever is in. So from a stacking standpoint, not to say that you can't go to Baltimore. Obviously, you could just avoid those guys, or you could hope that they are up 10-0 and nobody bothers pinch hitting. That is also possible. But just be careful because like Slater at 2,500 and Jimenez at 3,400 are going to project as good point per dollar values. They are also pretty unlikely to not be hitting later on in the game. So do keep that in mind. Looking at what the field's doing at first base, Shohei Ohtani, 13% projected ownership. I have 5%, but that is just first base. Pretty good chance that I'm getting more of him in the outfield. That generally does happen. Not getting to as much Vlad as I guess I was hoping or I would like, but if you were to get a little bit more, that would certainly be perfectly fine. At second base, I assume I'm getting to even more Brandon Lau. Actually, not as much as I expected at second base, but 18% total. Field's at 9, so I'm like 2x total. Christopher Morel at the top, 4,200. We don't have the lineup yet. He ended up not being in it yesterday, but I do like him in a spot like this where he's facing a pitcher in Estes that does strike out 21 to 22% of righties, so that's better than his overall numbers, but it's not like he's a very good strikeout pitcher. Morel is relatively likely to be able to put the ball in play. He is a hitter that has power, but struggles to put the ball in play. So I do like him a decent amount in this matchup. Sosa, just a value play that negatively correlates with Ray. That's nothing to get excited about, but he is cheap. He is going to open up some salary for you to get to other guys. And one other thing to keep in mind that does make the White Sox look a little bit better than they otherwise would, Robbie Ray is very bad at controlling the running game. So guys like Sosa and Robert at the top of the order, if they get on, they are likely to be running and running successfully against Ray. So even though it's not like it's the best hitting matchup, this is somebody that puts guys on base via walk, and then he can't stop them from running. So that does make somebody like Sosa look a little bit better. Will Wagner, batting cleanup at 2,500 in a good matchup, pretty straightforward. Jorge Polanco getting the park upgrade at 4K. I like getting there. Pretty spread out at second base, beyond that. The field looks pretty spread out as well. Maikel Garcia getting the most ownership. I'm under the field, at least at second base. Don't know what I have at third yet. Gleyber Torres, a little under the field, but nothing too crazy. Over the field on Lau overall. So, field's pretty spread out. I'm pretty spread out, but I like the guys that I'm getting to here. If Morel were to not be in the lineup, I probably would just start getting some more Brandon Lau at second base. It is kind of a tricky spot with Tampa because Lau is first base, second base, Morel is second base, but neither of Caballero or Caminero have second base. So kind of a tricky spot. Hopefully we get that lineup, but either way, it shouldn't be too difficult to move stuff around. At third base, Caballero showing up the most, but really, really flat at third base. I would like Caballero more if Estes allowed stolen bases, but, because Caballero does have like 35 of them this season. But when you steal bases at the rate that Caballero does, there's no guarantee that he wouldn't try it on Estes just because nobody has gotten one in 87 innings. Obviously, I would prefer if I knew that you could run on him. But either way, at a $3,900 price tag, third base shortstop eligible, happy to get to him, especially, right now he's projected to hit ninth. He hit third yesterday. If you get that lineup bump, he obviously looks that much better. Julian said Mets only have one lefty in the bullpen. Yeah, it's a low leverage guy in Danny Young. So just going back to, the pinch hit risk for guys like Slater and Jimenez is very high. He also said pay attention to if Patrick Bailey is back for the Giants. Really good catcher at controlling the running game. But generally you're running on pitching, not catching. So I still would expect them to be trying to run on Ray. Obviously, you would prefer that he have a bad catcher in addition to being bad at holding runners, but generally going to be stealing bases on pitching instead of catching, especially when it's a bad pitcher. Like if you have a pitcher that is average and a catcher that sucks, obviously you're running on the catcher. But catchers can only do so much for pitchers that are unable to get the ball to the plate quickly. So very, very spread out at third base. I do like that I'm getting the Devers a decent amount here, a little bit higher than the field. Again, really, really like the matchup for the left-handed bats for the Red Sox. I would like to get to more if I could, but there's just a lot that looks similar today, and Devers is very expensive. One thing that stands out at third base is that it does look like overall it's a position I'm paying down at. $3,900 Caballero, $3,600 Rendon, $3,100 Caminero, 2,600 Vargas, 2,200 JC Young. So it does, with the exception of Devers and some Chapman rather, look like a position that I am saving some salary. There's nothing that stands out, I guess, outside of Devers as like a a great play at third base that I need to pay up for. In the aggregate, I'm around the field on Michael Garcia, who does look pretty good leading off at 4,500. But yeah, it looks like a position where I am saving some money. Royce Lewis, I wouldn't mind if I were getting some more there. Facing a pitcher in Martin Perez that does give up power to righties. This Minnesota team is another one that I think projects pretty well, point per dollar, going up against Perez, but you do need to keep pinch hit risk in mind because they are a team that platoons pretty heavily. We do not have their lineup yet, but you're probably going to have like Manny Margot in there with pinch hit risk, Kyle Farmer, who's really cheap but has pinch hit risk. But somebody like Royce Lewis, not going to get pinch hit for. Jose Miranda, probably not getting pinch hit for. So Lewis, if I could find the salary, I would like to be getting a little bit more, but just not a position where I'm really paying up. So it is what it is. Shortstop, I would like to be getting to Seager, and he is my highest owned shortstop, tied with Dela Cruz, both at 9%. Obviously, like both of them, you don't need me to tell you that they're both really good. Barrios is pretty close to average as far as controlling the running game, a little bit above average, but nothing too crazy. I would expect De La Cruz to at least try, which is all you can really ask for. He's expensive. Seager's expensive. Trey Turner's expensive. So you can see here where I'm allocating the money that I was saving at third base. My top four shortstops are at least $5,300, Seager, De La Cruz, Turner, and Bobby Witt. Also getting to 6%, $5,200 Fitzgerald, 5%, $5,700 Lindor. So prioritizing paying up at shortstop, saving some money at second base, saving some money at third base so that I can do it. And that's not really unusual. That's kind of been the trend this year. Shortstop just being a weird position where the depth at the position isn't that great. If you're not an elite hitter, you're probably not that good of a hitter. But so many of the best hitters in baseball now are shortstops. Gunnar Henderson's in 4% of my lineups as well at 6,700 or 6,100. Even Adames showing up 5%. So really, really getting to these expensive shortstops, really with like the exception of Leo Jimenez and Caminero. Clearly going to be happy with that. And then looking at the outfield, where for the most part, I'm getting some relatively inexpensive guys. Josh Lowe at the top. He is the other Tampa guy that I would really want to single out along with Brandon Lau. These are the two best left-handed hitters that they have. Lowe is also affordable this season. Lowe, 215 plate appearances against right-handed pitching, 183 WRC+. He does have some speed also, although, like I said, doesn't appear to be an easy spot to run against Estes. Going back to last season, 647 plate appearances for Josh Lowe, 200 expected ISO. There's power in this bat. He's only 3,900. Julio Rodriguez and Randy Arozarena with the nice park upgrades in LA. Going up against Buehler, who has struggled this year, does have a lower strikeout percentage so far against right-handed hitters. 201 expected ISO in that split as well. Those guys both look good. Johnny DeLuca may or may not be in the lineup for Tampa. He's 2,500, so if he's in there, it's just a value play. If he's not in there, you'll probably have like Dylan Carlson, who's also pretty cheap. I don't love DeLuca, but it is righty-righty. He doesn't have a good stolen base matchup, but he is cheap and in Tampa stacks, perfectly fine to get to. But if that ends up being like Jose Siri or Dylan Carlson, it serves the same purpose. Luis Robert, I like. Stolen base upside, power upside, only 4,300. He has been stealing. Whether or not he is capable or cares about hitting at this point is pretty up in the air, but he is still stealing bases, so that's good at least. Hasn't completely checked out, I guess. Victor Robles leading off for the Mariners, we assume, is going to look pretty good. Ohtani. So yeah, I'm pretty much around the field on Ohtani. I think I had 4 or 5% at first base. I have about 9 in the outfield. The matchup with Bryce Miller is actually pretty good. Miller's a good pitcher overall, but does have pretty drastic splits. 26% K percentage against righties this year with only a 144 expected ISO and a 268 expected WOBA allowed. Only striking out 21.3% of lefties, so about 5 points lower against left-handed hitters in K percentage. 230 expected ISO, 337 expected WOBA, and Shohei Ohtani is pretty good at hitting. So clearly happy to get to him. Happy to get to like Max Muncy, Freddie Freeman where I can as well. And it is a good park for hitting too, obviously. Joe Adell, has power, probably going to strike out a bunch. But if he somehow makes contact, he can hit it pretty far. Garcia, Ward, Friedel, Springer, all just pretty solid outfield plays. The field is getting to Ohtani the most, and then just not, again, pretty spread out. That's how I think it should be played. That is how I expect to play it. But it does also kind of reinforce why my exposures are so spread out. Like I was saying earlier in the show, I expected to be spread out on stacks and players today because everything looks so similar. The exception, or the thing that would make that not be the case, is if the field weren't projected to play it that way. If just grabbing teams that I happen to be right in front of me, let's say on this slate, the field was just locking in on Kansas City and Philadelphia and the Mets, just three random teams that have pretty high totals. And those guys were actually getting a lot of ownership. It would drive down, obviously, the ownership on all of the other teams. And there would end up being a few teams that are just projected for like no ownership that I think should be getting 7 or 8% ownership. In a situation like that, I would end up playing those teams pretty aggressively, trying to exploit the field. And you would see those players really rising to the top ahead of other players, even if the range of outcomes is similar, ahead of other players that are getting more ownership. But because the field is likely to have flat exposures because everything looks so similar and there are so many options, my strategy ends up being to also play pretty flat because I don't think that there's anything super exploitable in the way the field is likely to play here. So that it all goes hand in hand. You saw it with the pitching exposures too. But that's kind of the caveat where if I was projecting the field to play really poorly, it would change the way that I'm approaching it, but not projecting it that way. And so it does lead to me playing pretty flat. Also, any Parker Meadows, I can look. Definitely not somebody that was standing out. Detroit in general, I think that game's actually kind of interesting. 5% Meadows for me, Fields at 6%. The Tigers and Cubs game was an interesting one. I mentioned in the article that I wrote for Dub Club and Endgame subscribers, because there's a really good chance that some sort of value comes out of that game where you have $6,900 Javier Assad pitching for the Cubs. You have $6K Salmons expected to be the bulk guy for the Tigers. When I wrote that article initially, he was actually starting, so he didn't look good anyway, and he looks less good now. But the offenses are also pretty cheap against two like mediocre cheap pitchers. There's a pretty good chance that some sort of value comes out of that game. The problem is just that on a 13-game slate, being like a good point per dollar value doesn't really mean you're going to be in the winning lineup or necessarily even close to it. So it gets pushed down. If this were like an 8-game slate or a 5-game slate, I would probably actually be pretty aggressively targeting this game just because of how cheap every aspect of it is. But on a 13-gamer, it kind of just is getting lost in the wash for me where I'm getting to a little bit of it, but nothing too crazy. Pretty much just right around the field on the Tigers bats that I'm looking at. Parker Meadows leading the way at 5%. So kind of a weird game. Would probably look better on the turbo slate, assuming there is one, or if the slate were just smaller in general. Steve McGee said $5,300 last guy in the outfield. Let me make sure I have my projections. Ownership aside, Rodriguez is my highest projected guy, sub 5,300. Obviously, it depends on what your lineup looks like. Anybody in pretty much anybody in on this screen, like these projections are all so flat that I would be just wanting to correlate with your lineup more so than pick a hitter. If you had the Tigers, it's Riley Green. If you have the Mariners, it's Rodriguez or Rosarena. If you have Toronto, it's probably Springer. So, really just correlation would be the big thing for me. But Rodriguez is my highest projected outfielder under 5,300. Any Pittsburgh interest tonight? Some. They do get the park upgrade in Texas. They get a little bit of negative correlation going against the 15-ish% owned pitcher in Bradford. The problem is that they don't have a ton of right-handed power. They do have some pinch hit risk too. We just got that. We got that lineup at some point during this show. But Joey Bart's hitting third, so good lineup spot for him. Connor Joe batting cleanup at 3,500. There is a pretty decent chance he ends up getting pinch hit for later in the game, but that won't always happen. It's not guaranteed. So at 3,500, don't mind that. De La Cruz batting fifth at 3,600. The lineup they put out there is actually kind of nice for stacking. They dropped O'Neal Cruz to sixth, lefty lefty. Bradford has actually given up some expected power to lefties this year, but it is a very small sample. If you're stacking the Pirates, I don't hate the idea of including O'Neal Cruz also, just because people are going to shy away from him at a loaded shortstop position, an expensive price tag, a lefty-lefty matchup. But at the same time, with how flat ownership is on this slate, it's not necessarily one where you need to get that cute once you're stacking the Pirates. Like if you're stacking the Pirates, you can kind of just play whatever Pirates you want. It's not gonna benefit you that much to like overpay for O'Neal Cruz batting sixth, but worth noting, he is just one of their higher upside players. ABJ said, how do you feel about Boston as a stack? I'm not getting a lot of them. I actually really like them, like in my head. They're middle of the road here for me as far as all stack types go. They fall off quite a bit for 5-mans. Getting to some as 4-mans. Let me see what those look like. But yeah, I do. They're one of the teams that if I'm just looking, if I were like explaining to somebody why I like a team, Boston's one of the easiest ones for me to explain because while Ronel Blanco is a perfectly fine pitcher, he struggles pretty drastically against lefties, gives up a lot more power, strikes them out at a lower clip, and you get 5 good lefties in the top 6 for Boston. So here we have a 5-man Boston lineup: Devers, Duran, Abreu, or sorry, 4-man: Devers, Duran, Abreu, Jansen. So they are relatively expensive. That could be a little bit of the problem, but Devers looks I really like Devers, Duran, Abreu. Getting to Cole Reagans in that one too is nice. 2-man there with Devers, Abreu. 2-man with Devers, Abreu. 4-man with Casas, Duran, Devers, and then a punt with Danny Jansen. Jansen, Devers, 2-man. Jansen, Devers, 2-man. 5-man with Devers and Duran from the left side. So getting the 3 righties there. I don't love that one. Blanco is better against righties, but obviously those guys are still fine. Rafaela, Yoshida, Jansen, Casas, Devers. So here's a 5-man. Like if I was just hand picking the Red Sox I wanted to get to, this is it. Casas, Devers, Abreu, Duran, Yoshida. Now the problem, and this is probably why I'm not getting more Boston, is that the rest of the lineup looks like shit. Will Wagner is a good value play. I like him. He's 2,500. Leo Jimenez, value correlates with Wagner a bit, but not the most exciting shortstop play. Diaz is fine. Does have home run upside against Pivetta for sure. Robbie Ray, is good. Assad is not a particularly good pitcher. Does have a decent matchup against Detroit. If you have to pay down, he's fine. So I guess saying the rest of the lineup was shit is probably a little harsh, but you can see that it does hamstring you a little bit in what else you can do when you're talking about pairing a $5,900 Devers with a $5,800 Duran, a $4,700 Casas. But it is a lineup that at the very least I like getting to as many stacks. If you can find ways to get to them as a 5-man that look good, that's perfectly fine as well. Houston does have 3 left-handed relievers in their bullpen. One of them is Josh Hader, who one is their closer. So from a stacking standpoint, isn't really that relevant because if you get to Josh Hader, your stack isn't doing well anyway, most likely. He also has pitched the last 2 days, so may not even be available today. Caleb Ferguson pitched yesterday. I assume he's good to go today. Caleb Ward hasn't pitched since Friday. So 2 lefties that they can use to match up. And keep in mind that the Red Sox will pinch hit. If you get a competitive game and you bring in one of those lefties to face like Abreu or Yoshida, there's a pretty decent chance that's turning into like Ref Snyder. If you bring him in against like David Hamilton, that could turn into like Romy Gonzalez. But also, if they just hang 8 runs on Blanco, it's less likely that the Astros bother to match up. It's less likely the Red Sox bother to pitch hit. So it's not a guarantee these guys get pitch hit for. It is just a risk, more so in competitive games. But yeah, if you can find ways to make the Red Sox work, I like them. They are one of the easiest stacks for me to look at and say, like, this matchup looks good for this reason. They're one of the few on the slate, actually, that I think really has that. Am I getting a lot of Blanco on KC? I don't think that I was. I wouldn't really want to be. He does have some stolen base upside. He does also have pinch hit risk. I don't think I'm getting to a lot of Kansas City overall. I think that they're one of the more popular teams on the slate. And they look pretty similar to me to a lot of other teams. I can pull up, though, and see what Blanco I do have. He's getting 7% ownership. I don't have any. He's batting 8th. Again, does have stolen base upside, but Tyler Anderson is not great. He's not he's slightly better than average at holding runners. I would expect if Blanco gets on, he tries to run, but I also would expect that Blanco doesn't finish this game, especially if it's competitive. And so where he is semi-popular, I'm just not really getting to him. He's somebody that's just pretty unlikely to burn me. Am I targeting any of the higher owned pitching? Yeah. Ray, Wheeler, Reagans are my 3 highest owned pitchers along with the field. I guess I need to uncheck Kansas City, but yeah, getting to those guys, I think the field's pretty much got it right there. I think I'm caught up on questions, and that's everything I had. So if there's anything last minute, get those in. Am I cool with a 2-3 Reagan? Oh, with 2 of 3 Reagans, Wheeler, Ray, and 3 Max. Yeah, that's fine. I don't know that that's what I would get to, but there's nothing wrong with it at all. Those are my 3 favorite pitchers on the slate. If I pay down at shortstop, your lineup's cooked. I mean, that's not true necessarily, but obviously I do prefer paying up at shortstop. Yeah, so the Guardians against Heel, they're in Yankee Stadium. They have some left-handed power. Heel walks a lot of guys, obviously works behind in a lot of counts. I wouldn't say Cleveland is like that much worse than a lot of other teams on the slate. That said, I'm not really getting to them much at all as mini stacks or as anything. 4 out of 150 lineups would have 2 or more Guardians for me. So, yeah, they're I guess they're one of those teams I would put it in the spot where, like, if they win the slate, I wouldn't look at it like, holy shit, how did the Guardians do that? Or why did anybody play the Guardians or anything like that? But also, they aren't really making the cut for me too much. Reagans, Wheeler, Ray ownership. I mean, I have them projected right now around, like 27, like 20 to 35%, really depending on which one. But I'll update that before lock also for Dub Club or Endgame subscribers. If you don't or haven't signed up for those, Dub Club, the link is in my Twitter bio, I think. If not, DM me and I'll give it to you. Endgame Syndicate, the link is in the description below. The Endgame Syndicate members automatically get all of my Dub Club stuff, which includes my projections, top stacks, optimal percentages, ownership percentages for main slates or generally just slates that I'm playing. So all of that is included for Endgame people. But if that's all you want, you can also just get it through Dub Club. But again, sign up for Endgame. Use the link in the description below. Great time to do that. Get ready for NFL season. All 4 of us approach things pretty differently over there. We've all had success with our own ways. No matter how you think about DFS or approach it, there's somebody that is going to make sense to you, most likely, and help you get better. Thanks for checking out the show. Don't forget to hit the thumbs up button. I'll see you all back here tomorrow for tomorrow's main slate. Not going to do anything for the early slate, but I will be back for the main slate, talking tournaments for that one. Good luck on your lineups tonight. Thanks again for checking out the show.